In a busy city, famed for its diverse population and strong law enforcement system, there lived a very strong lady named Olivia Thompson. Olivia was born and brought up in a closely knit African-American community. She had always been aware of the problems people of color had to face in everyday life. Since childhood, she showed an unwavering dedication toward the cause of justice and equality that would later become the foundation of her professional life and character. Her parents were both working individuals who inculcated in her the virtues of integrity, hard work, and she was raised by her parents to stand up for what is right no matter how popular the opposing opinion. Olivia did well in school. She had straight A's and was able to get a scholarship to a very good university. It was during her college years that she realized her calling, the law. She enrolled in law school, determined to make a change. Olivia pursued her legal education with an uncompromising seriousness. She plunged into the study of constitutional law, civil rights, and social justice, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Her professors and peers were impressed with she was a person to impress with a sharp mind, eloquence, and a clear sense of purpose. Olivia, for one, never viewed the law as some sort of abstraction, but rather it was a part of her life and a part of the community in which she lived. Upon graduation with honors, Olivia launched into her career as a defense attorney, taking on clients from every walk of life. Her reputation would soon grow as a tenacious advocate who never shied away from the most difficult cases, sometimes pitted against formidable foes. Her devotion to her clients and artful handling of the legal process as her career progressed, she earned the respect and admiration of her peers and the gratitude of those she served. Olivia's reputation continued to grow, soon reaching the attention of those in high places. Her integrity, intelligence, and commitment to justice made her a prime candidate for a judicial position. Knowing this would give her an even greater platform from which to effect change. Upholding those principles dear to her heart, when the opportunity arose, Olivia applied for a seat on the bench. The selection process was very thorough, but Olivia's qualifications and character shone through. She was appointed judge, becoming one of the few African-American women to hold such a position in her jurisdiction. As she took her oath of office, Olivia felt a profound sense of responsibility and pride. She knew her role as a judge was not only a personal achievement, but also a symbol of PR progress and hope for her community. From the moment she donned her judicial robes, Judge Olivia Thompson was a force to be reckoned with in the courtroom. Her rulings were fair, impartial, and squarely grounded on the principles of justice and equality. She handled every defendant who came before her with dignity and respect, regardless of background or circumstance. Her courtroom became a beacon of hope to those seeking justice, and her reputation as a fair but compassionate judge spread far and wide in no time. On her way to success, Judge Thompson never lost sight of her roots or the challenges her community still had to face. She leveraged her position to advocate for reform and to tackle systemic inequalities within the legal system. She spoke out loud against racial profiling, police brutality, and the racially disproportionate incarceration rate. Her voice became an effective tool to encourage others to follow her lead in the fight for justice. One evening, while seated in her chambers reflecting on the journey that had brought her thus far and the many challenges yet ahead, Judge Olivia Thompson felt a new sense of resolve. She knew well that her work was far from done, but neither the path to true equality would be long and arduous. Yet she also knew that she had the strength, the knowledge base, and the diligently, with a resolute heart and an unwavering commitment to justice, with a readiness for whatever lay ahead in battles yet to come. But little did she know that such a routine traffic stop would put her convictions to the ultimate test and cast her center stage in a way she had never anticipated. But now, Judge Olivia Thompson focused on the present as she prepared to dispense justice and uphold the law in what was just another case among many others. On a chilly autumn evening, Judge Olivia Thompson behind the wheel of her car, driving down the busy streets of the city after a very long and trying day in court, she finally had the weight of her judicial robes lifted, but the responsibility of her position was never truly off her shoulders. Driving, her mind set on those cases she had presided over today, touching lives and dispensing justice to the best way she could interpret the law, Olivia barely registered the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. It took her an extra second longer to realize there was a police officer signaling her to pull over. Sighing for her to pull over, she carefully veered her car onto the side of the road, wondering what could have provoked the traffic stop. She ran her mind over her driving in the last few minutes, knowing she'd done nothing in violation of the traffic rules. She took a deep breath as she waited for the officer to approach, reminding herself to be composed and cool. In her line of work, she had encountered her fair share of law enforcement officers. She knew that even in cases of routine interactions, when not treated with care and caution, things could turn ugly. The officer, a middle-aged white man with a stern expression, approached Olivia's car with a purposeful stride. He tapped on her window, and she promptly rolled it down, greeting him with a polite smile. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. The officer's demeanor, however, was far from cordial. He looked at Olivia with a mixture of suspicion and disdain, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her face and the interior of her car. "License and registration," he demanded. His tone harsh and abrupt. Olivia complied, handing over her documents with a sense of unease. She had experienced her share of prejudice and discrimination throughout her life, but the officer's hostile attitude caught her off guard as he scrutinized her license. She wondered what could have prompted such a reaction. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Olivia shook her head, maintaining her composure despite the officer's aggressive tone. "No, officer, I believe I was driving in accordance with the traffic laws." The officer scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. "You people always think you're above the law, don't you? Driving around in your fancy cars thinking you can get away with anything." Olivia felt a surge of anger at the officer's blatant racism, but she quickly set it down, knowing that reacting with emotion would only escalate the situation. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "Officer, I assure you that I have not violated any traffic laws. If you could please clarify the reason for this stop, I would appreciate it." The officer's face hardened, and he leaned into the window with his voice low, menacingly. "I don't need to clarify anything to you. You people are always up to no good, and it is my job to keep the streets clean from the likes of you." Olivia's heart was racing as she realized that this wasn't just a routine traffic stop. She was coming face to face with the ugly face of racism and abuse of power. The officers weren't stung, but she refused to let them shake her resolve. She knew she was going to have to be extremely cautious when handling this situation, not only because she took a moment to compose herself for her own protection, but also for the greater good of justice. After collecting her thoughts, Olivia looked directly into the face of the officer. "Officer, I know you have an obligation to uphold the law, but I can assure you I have done nothing wrong," she said in a firm voice that didn't even quiver. "I am a law-abiding citizen and a respected member of this community. I ask you now to afford me the respect and professionalism that any other individual deserves." The officer's face contorted in anger, and he reached for the handle of Olivia's car, door open, his intentions unclear. It was then Olivia knew she had to act upon quick wit and a firm decision. She had to stand up for her rights, her dignity, not only for her own sake, but also for all those fallen victim to the very system meant for their protection. Inhaling deeply once, Olivia steeled herself for the expected confrontation with the strength of her convictions and the weight of her position. Not that she felt her next few moments were going to be critical in regard to her safety, but more than that, in the broader perspective in the struggle against injustice. Ahead, as the officer's hand laid grasp of the handle of Olivia's car door, a surging in the veins from the adrenaline that coursed through her being warned her that the next few instants were going to be critical in how this standoff would eventually come to an end. In a calm, clear voice, she said, "Officer, I advise you to step away from my vehicle. You have no legal right to open my door without my consent or probable cause." The officer's face contorted into a sneer as his eyes flashed with anger. "I don't take orders from people like you," he snarled, spitting out his words, dripping with contempt. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you can tell me how to do my job?" Olivia remained composed, her voice steady and unwavering. "Officer, I am not trying to tell you how to do your job. I am simply asserting my rights as a citizen. I have complied with your request for my license and registration, and I have answered your questions truthfully. If you have a valid reason for detaining me further, please take it now. Otherwise, I respectfully request that you allow me to leave." The officer's grip on the door handle tightened, And for a moment Olivia feared that he would forcibly open the door, but instead he leaned in closer to the window, his face mere inches from hers. "You people always think you're entitled to special treatment," he growled. "You drive around in your fancy cars, living in your fancy homes, thinking you're better than the rest of us. Well, let me tell you something, Missy. Out here on these streets, I'm the one in charge, and I don't care who you think you are." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine at the officer's words, but she refused to let her fear show. She had faced discrimination and prejudice before, but never had she encountered such blatant racism from a law enforcement officer. She knew that she had to stand her ground, not only for herself, but for all those who had been victimized by the very people sworn to protect them. Taking a deep breath, Olivia looked right at the officer in the eye, her gaze unremitting. "Officer, your words and actions are not only unprofessional, but also highly offensive. I have done nothing wrong, nothing to warrant this treatment, and I will not tolerate being spoken to in such a manner. I ask again, do you have a valid reason for detaining me, or am I free to go?" The officer's face renayed with rage, and for a moment Olivia thought he might lash out physically, but instead he stepped back from the car, his hand moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "You're not going anywhere until I say so," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I have the authority to detain you for as long as I see fit, and there's nothing you can do about it." Olivia's heart braced, but refused to back down. She knew the officer's actions were a clear abuse of power, and she wouldn't be bullied. In a calm, even voice, she spoke. "Officer, I understand that you have the authority to detain individuals when there is probable cause, but I have given you no reason to suspect me of any wrongdoing. If you continue detaining me without cause, I will have no choice but to file a formal complaint against you and your department." The officer's eyes widened at Olivia's words, and for a moment she saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face, but just as quickly his expression hardened, and he leaned in close once more. "You think you can threaten me?" he hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I can make your life a living hell, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it." Olivia felt a surge of anger at the officer's blatant abuse of power, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. She knew that she had to remain calm and level-headed if she was going to navigate this situation successfully. With a steadying breath, she reached for her purse, her movements slow and deliberate. The officer's hand twitched towards his weapon, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice tight with tension. Olivia looked up at him, her expression calm and resolute. "I am reaching for my identification," she said, her words measured and precise. "I think it's time for you to know exactly who you are dealing with, officer." With that, she pulled out her judicial identification card, holding it up for the officer to see as his eyes widened in shock and recognition. Olivia knew the tide had turned in her favor, but this was far from over, and she steeled herself for the confrontation that was shortly to come. As Olivia held up her judicial identification card, the officer's eyes went wide with incredulity. He stared at the card, agape with his mouth, as the full realization of who had been confronting slowly made its way into his brain. The air between them seemed to sizzle with tension as palpably the power dynamic shifted. "Judge Olivia Thompson," the officer muttered, barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize." Olivia fixed him with a steely gaze, her voice calm but firm. "Officer, I have identified myself as a member of the judiciary. I am well aware of my rights and the limits of your authority. Now, I asked you again, do you have a valid reason for detaining me, or am I free to go?" The officer's face paled, and he took a step back from the car, his hand dropping from his weapon. I apologize, Your Honor," he stammered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just doing my job." Olivia's narrowed, and she, "Officer, your actions today have been far beyond the scope of your job. You spoke with a quiet intensity. You have profiled racistically, made baseless accusations, and abused your authority. This is not how a law enforcement officer should conduct themselves." The officer's shoulders slumped as he looked down at the ground, unable to meet Olivia's gaze. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I don't know what came over me. It won't happen again." Olivia shook her head, her expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "Officer, an apology is not enough. Your actions today are indicative of a greater problem within our law enforcement system. Racial profiling and abuse of power have no place in a just society, let alone among those sworn to uphold the law." The officer shifted uncomfortably, his earlier defiance completely deflated. I understand, Your Honor. I'll report myself to my superior. Superiors. They'll accept whatever consequences they see fit. Olivia's gaze softened slightly, her voice even firmer. I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility for your actions, officer. But this incident cannot just be swept under the rug. I will file a formal complaint with your department, and I do expect one full investigation into your conduct. Moreover, I will be advocating for systemic changes in larger issues of racial bias and misconduct within law enforcement. The officer nodded, his face a mix of shame and resignation. I understand, Your Honor. Independent Illinois cooperate fully with whatever investigation. I know I was wrong, and I am ready to face the consequences. Olivia took a deep breath. Her will unshaken, I do hope this incident would prove to be an eye-opener, officer. We must not let racism and abuse of authority continue unabated, especially from those sworn to serve and protect. It is our duty as officers of the law and as citizens to stand up against injustice wherever we see it. He nodded slowly. The arrogance earlier was completely gone. You are right, Your Honor. I have lots of thinking to do. I promise I will do better, and I will work to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Olivia's face, I will just say that moral dynamic was softened a bit, and she nodded in acknowledgement. I really do believe people can change, officer. The slight softening of voice now laced with a sternness. But change requires more than just words. It requires action, accountability, and a legitimate commitment to right action. And I hope that you take this opportunity to grow into a better officer and better person. With that, Olivia returned her judicial badge to her purse and looked at him expectantly. Now, unless there's anything else, I think we're done here. The officer nodded, stepping back from the car and gesturing for Olivia to proceed. You're free to go. Your and thank you. Thank you for holding me accountable and for giving me the chance to make things right. Olivia nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. That's all any of us can ask for, officer. A chance to do better, to be better. Let's make sure we don't waste it. With that, she rolled up her window and pulled away from the curb, her mind already racing with the steps she would need to take to address this incident and the broader issues it represented. It was going to be a long, exhaustive road ahead, but Olivia knew she was ready to meet it head-on for justice, for her community, and for a better future toward which to strive. As Olivia drove away from the site of the confrontation, her mind whirred with thoughts and emotions. She had experienced racism and prejudice earlier, but never so brazenly from a person committed to uphold the law. The experience had shaken her to the core, yet it had made her resolve even firmer to fight for justice and equality were pulling onto the parking lot of her office. Olivia took a minute, breathed in deeply, letting the heavy beating of her heart subside. She knew this incident with the officer was only the tip of the iceberg, a symptom of something greater playing out in the criminal justice system. She also knew that she had the power, the platform, and the place to make that change. Olivia strode into her office with determination, failing to acknowledge the curious glances of her coworkers. She shut the door behind her and took a seat at her desk. Her mind had already started formulating a plan of action, knowing that she would have to address the incident with the officer. But by the position she held, she needed to bring it out into the open concerning the more generalized issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. She picked up her phone and dialed the number of the police commissioner, a man she had worked with on several occasions. When he answered, she didn't mince words. "Commissioner, this is Judge Olivia Thompson. I need to speak to you about an incident that occurred." Earlier today, the commissioner listened intently as Olivia recounted details of what she had gone through at the hands of the officer. His voice was growing every second more concerned, with the connotations of racist remarks and abuse of power by the officer. At the end, the commissioner was speechless for some time, his shock palpable even on the phone line. "Judge Thompson, I am really bothered by what you have told me," he said finally. His heavy voice came laced with emotion. "I want to assure you that this kind of behavior is definitely not acceptable and will not be tolerated. Personally, within our department, I will oversee the investigation of this officer's conduct, and I promise you appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. Olivia nodded. Her tone was firm and resolute in tenor. "Thank you for your commitment to finding a resolution for this issue, Commissioner. But I also must impress upon you that it is not an isolated incident. Racial profiling and police misconduct are systemic issues. They require systemic solutions. We need to take a hard look at how our law enforcement agencies function and make meaningful changes that treat all citizens with fairness and respect." The commissioner didn't say a word for a second, and Olivia could hear the weight of her words sink in. "You're right, Judge Thompson," he said finally, after what felt like an eternity. His voice, too, was heavy with responsibility. "We have much work to rebuild trust lost between law enforcement and the communities we serve. I promise to work with you and other community leaders to craft and institute meaningful reforms that really get to the root of these issues." Olivia felt a surge of hope but deep inside her heart, she knew that the way forward would be long and costly. "Commissioner," she said to him, appreciation in her voice, "I look forward to working with you for a more just and equitable criminal justice system. But at the same time, I know very well that change cannot be effected behind closed doors. We need to cast these issues into the light and engage the community in the process of reform." The commissioner agreed, and the two spent the next several minutes discussing potential strategies for raising awareness and involving the change in the community. In a sudden turn, Olivia had one get-up-and-over desk to walk to the window, overseeing the city below. She knew the fight for justice and equality would not go so easy, but she also knew it was one worth fighting. She took one deep breath, and then turned back to her desk, beginning to draft a statement to the press about her experience with the officer and her commitment to addressing the greater issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. As she typed, Olivia felt a sense of power and purpose wash over her that she had never before experienced. She knew now that she had the power to make real change in the lives of her fellow citizens, and she was determined to use her position and her platform toward that goal. For the first time in her career, she felt alive, connected with her work for the cause of justice that had always been her guiding light. A final keystroke, and Olivia completed her statement, leaned back in her chair. A small smile playing at the corners of her lips, knew that the path ahead would be long and arduous. But she also knew she wasn't going to be troubled, because she was ready to face it headlong for her people, for justice, and for a better future of all. Days passed, but Olivia's encounter with the police officer began to take center stage in the entire country. The story of a reputed African-American judge being subjected to blatant racism and abuse of power by a law enforcement officer aroused outrage and a call for change from communities. From coast to coast, as media descended upon the city, Olivia found herself at the center of a maelstrom of attention. Reporters clamoring for interviews and community leaders and activists seeking her out for guidance and support. Though overwhelming at times, Olivia knew such attention provided an opportunity to shed light on those systemic issues of racial profiling and police misconduct that had so long plagued the criminal justice system. With calm and poise, Olivia leveraged her platform, speaking out about her experience and the greater ills involved. She granted interviews to national media, outlets took part in community forums and rallies, and she met with local and state officials to discuss strategies for reform. As the community rallied behind her, Olivia was heartened by the outpouring of support and solidarity. People from all walks of life, from all racial and ethnic backgrounds, came together to demand change and accountability from law enforcement. There were marches and protests in the streets, and community leaders and activists worked tirelessly around the clock to ensure the movement did not dissipate. But Olivia knew this was not about one incident or a lone police officer. Rather, it involved a system that had been broken for a very long time, a system that had brought upon racism and inequality for several decades. She knew true reform required persistence by every segment of society: law enforcement, the courts, the greater community. As the investigation into the officer's conduct proceeded, Olivia worked closely with the police commissioner and others. She advocated for officials to create a roadmap for reform by pushing for more training and accountability for police and more openness and oversight when it came to handling complaints of wrongdoing. Olivia soon realized that true reform could not be done within a vacuum. So she extended an olive branch to community leaders and agencies, asking them for input and partnership in the reform process. With all this, she worked to build bridges between law enforcement and their communities served, knowing trust and understanding were essential for true progress to be made. As the weeks turned into months, Olivia's efforts began to bear fruit. The officer who had confronted her was found guilty of misconduct and dismissed from the force, sending a powerful message that racism and abuse of power would not be tolerated. New training programs and accountability measures were implemented within the police department, and a community oversight board was established to provide greater transparency and input from the public. But Olivia knew that the work was far this is going to take long. She added over the systemic issues of racism and inequality that had long plagued the criminal justice system. But she was determined to keep fighting, to keep pushing for change and progress, no matter how long it took. Seated one evening in her office reflecting on the events of the past few months, Olivia felt a sense of pride and purpose that she had never known before. She had always been committed to justice and equality. But now, she felt truly now, for the first time in her life, linked to the fight. She gazed out at the silhouette of the city. Olivia knew full well that the way forward would be long and laborious. Still, she knew that she did not walk alone. The support of her community, the commitment of her co-workers, and strength in her convictions assured her that change was within reach. So, taking a deep breath and with renewed determination, Olivia turned back to work, prepared for whatever lay ahead. For she knew the fight for justice and equality was not only her battle, but all who stood and fought for a world much fairer and saner, and she was ready to join the battle one step at a time. With the investigation into the conduct of the officer pending, Olivia took her rightful place with immediate effect at the center of that complex, emotive process. The Internal Affairs section of the police department launched an investigation into the incident, including interviews with witnesses, reviews of body camera footage, and analysis of the officer's record of service. Olivia cooperated fully with the investigation and provided an in-depth account of her encounter with the officer and events leading up to it. She knew her testimony would be pivotal in how the case went, and she was resolved to see that justice was served. Evidence that turned up as the investigation rolled on could have led one to wonder if disturbing past behavior by the officer had gone unchecked. Other incidents included racial profiling and excessive use of force. All these showed a pattern of misconduct that went back for a period of time that was too long. Olivia watched as the case against the officer grew stronger. With each passing day, witnesses came forward to corroborate her account of the incident, and the body camera footage provided damning evidence of the officer's racist remarks and abuse of power. But even as it appeared that a case was building against the officer, Olivia knew that the road to justice would not go through easy lanes. The police union had rallied behind the officer, providing him with legal representation and public support. Some members of the law enforcement community went so far as to accuse Olivia of playing the race card, and attempting to discredit the police. All such attacks did little to deter Olivia, who was quite aware that one person would never win that struggle. She continued to speak about what happened to her and larger issues involved even as the backlash strengthened in intensity against her. As the investigation drew to a close, Olivia was holding her breath. She knew the outcome of the case would go well beyond just the result of the criminal trial for Jackie, as well as for the accused rapists. Her own life, but for the entire community. If he was found guilty and duly disciplined, it would send a huge message that racism and abuse of authority were unacceptable within the police force. If he was let off scot-free, it would have only reinforced this cynicism and distrust fostered by the police-community relationship. At last, after weeks of hectic investigation, the verdict came out. The officer was found guilty of misconduct and summarily dismissed. Olivia and her supporters welcomed the decision with feelings of relief and vindication, a major step toward justice and accountability. Yet, even as they celebrated this victory, Olivia knew the work was not over. The deeper issues in the police department, systemic problems that would take a lot of time, effort, and commitment, had been uncovered during the investigation. She knew she had to continue striving to move reform and change forward by working with the community leaders and the law. The weeks and months that followed are filled with the work of enforcement officials building a more just and equitable system for one and all. Throwing herself into this work with renewed energy and determination, Olivia met with the police commissioner and other high-ranking officials to discuss strategies for improving training accountability and community relations within the department. She also worked with community organizations and advocacy groups in developing grassroots initiatives aimed at building trust and fostering dialogue between law enforcement and the public. Through it all, Olivia remained a voice of calm and reason, a steadfast advocate for justice and equality in the face of even the most daunting challenges. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that change was possible, if only they had the courage and the commitment to see it through. Looking back on the events of the last few months, Olivia felt a sense of pride and purpose that she had never known before. She had always been committed to justice and equality, but now she felt truly more connected with the struggle than ever before. And as she looked to the future, she knew she would continue to fight for what was right no matter the cost, for her community, for justice, and for a better world for all. As the dust settled on the investigation into the officer's misconduct, Olivia found herself squarely at the center of a new conversation about the future of policing in her community. The incident had laid bare deep-seated issues within the department. There was a feeling that something needed to be done differently to rebuild that trust and make people accountable. Olivia had been at the right place in time to effect great impact for change as a respected member of the bench, but vocal to fight for justice and equality. She had the credence and podium from which serious, substantive reforms could be effected. Rejuvenated with her sense of purpose, she set out to do just that in the ensuing weeks and months. Olivia worked tirelessly to build coalitions and forge partnerships with community leaders, advocacy groups, and law enforcement officials to convene meetings and forums where the challenges facing the department would be discussed and solutions brainstormed. She lobbied local and state officials to support legislation to increase transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Yet even as she did so, Olivia knew that real change would require more than policy reforms. Real change would demand a sea change in culture and mindset on the part of the department, one that would involve an ability and a will to confront hard truths and to engage in honest, sometimes uncomfortable conversations about racial bias and power. To that end, Olivia worked with the police commissioner to develop a comprehensive training program for officers, one that emphasized de-escalation, cultural competency, and community policing. She helped establish a civilian oversight review board, an independent entity tasked with reviewing complaints against officers and recommending disciplinary action when necessary. She also called for greater diversity and inclusion within the department, calling for the recruitment and promotion of officers hailing from underrepresented communities to top jobs. All along the way, Olivia was there for the community, attending neighborhood meetings, listening to the residents' concerns and experiences, working to bridge the gaps between law enforcement and the people they served. She knew trust and understanding were essential to real progress being made, and she was determined to do her part to foster both. Slowly but surely, Olivia began to see the fruits of her labors. The department instituted new policies and procedures. The way officers engaged the community was drastically changing, aimed at increasing accountability and transparency. Complaints against officers went down, while surveys showed an increasing sense of trust and confidence in the department by residents. Still, Olivia knew that this was far from over. Systemic issues entrenched themselves deep, and these particular ones, leading all the way to the incident with this officer, would take lots of sustained work and commitment to totally root out. Along the way, there were setbacks and challenges. She had witnessed firsthand how strong the power of community was, drawing its strength from the uniting of people who wanted change and a better future. She was not deterred by those feelings of frustration and self-doubt, knowing well that such moments passed and real progress was possible with perseverance and determination. So, one evening in her office, pondering the journey up to this point, Olivia felt hopeful and optimistic about things she hadn't felt in a long period of time. She knew it would be a long and hard road ahead, but she also knew that wasn't all. With the community's support, with the dedication of her colleagues, and by the strength of her own conviction, anything could be possible. She looked out at the city skyline and smiled to herself, thinking of all the work that lay ahead. There would be more late nights and tough conversations, more battles to be fought and won. But she was ready for it all, ready to keep pushing forward, to keep fighting for justice and equality for as long as it took. For Olivia knew this was more than a job or a cause. It was called a true passion to make a difference in the world, and with that realization, she could rest assured of a sense of direction and commitment that would see her through any obstacle yet to come. She was ready to take the lead, be the voice of the voiceless, and stand up for those downtrodden, knowing full well that together they could create a better and more just world for all. As months went by, the years slowly reaped some benefits from Olivia's unrelenting efforts to reform the police department and build a more fair and equal community. The changes she had fought for, the new policies, procedures, training programs, and oversight boards were taking root slowly but surely in transforming the culture and practices of law enforcement in the city. Still, Olivia knew the work was never truly done. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference in the life of someone around her. She continued to press on to advocate for change, and by leading from example, even when the road ahead seemed so long and the obstacles insurmountable. Through it all, Olivia drew strength from the people around her, from the community leaders and activists who stood beside her in this fight for justice, from the dedicated officers working tirelessly to serve and protect their city, and from the many ordinary citizens who believed in the power of change and the promise of a better tomorrow. She saw the strength of the people in adversity, their courage, and their determination for what is right, and she knew together they could achieve anything they put their minds to past. Olivia's story became a beacon of hope and inspiration for people across the nation. Her steadfast dedication to justice and equality, fierce determination against insurmountable odds, had touched innumerable lives of individuals and communities, sparking a movement far beyond the borders of her city. She was invited to speak at conferences and events across the nation, whereby Olivia would share her experiences and insights with others who were fighting their own through the battles for change. She turned into a role model and mentor for a new breed of youthful leadership, both men and women who took her as an example of what was possible if one was simply courageous enough and convinced of being on the right path. Amidst it all, Olivia held on to humility and remained well-grounded by the ordinary truths that had put her on the path she had walked so far. She knew change was difficult, progress often labored and painful, but she also knew it was a fight worth pursuing, that each insignificant triumph, each step forward, brought them closer to the world they had dreamed of building. She reflected on the path that took her from the young girl who had witnessed her parents struggle against discrimination and injustice to the respected judge and community leader she had become. Olivia felt a pride and sense of purpose that overflowed from her heart. She knew she had been blessed with an opportunity few could dream of, to be in a position to make a difference in the world, to use her talents and her position to fight for values dear to her, and she knew she would do so for as long as she had breath in her body. For Olivia, the fight for justice and equality was more than a calling or career. It was a way of life, a sacred duty that she had been entrusted with. And she would not rest until that duty was fulfilled, until every person, regardless of race or background, could live in a world of true freedom and opportunity. As she sat in her office, looking out at the city she loves, Olivia felt a sense of hope and determination that she knew would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Setbacks would be many, barriers one after another. Yet she was also aware of not being alone. She was a part of something larger than herself, a movement reaching way beyond her circle, a movement to make a change in this world. And with that understanding, she obtained an inner strength and some sense of purpose to lead her forward, step by step. So taking a deep breath, squaring her shoulders, she turned back to her work, ready to face any new challenge that may come her way, because together they could bring a better, just a better world for all, and that was a fight worth fighting no matter how long it took.